I never thought I'd be the guy telling this kind of story. 7 years ago, when Sophia and I exchanged our vows, I was sure we had something unshakable. She was a wildfire to my slow-burning ember, a perfect balance of excitement and stability. But now, as I sit here piecing it all together, I wonder if I ever truly understood her. It started small, as these things often do. The Tuesday night movie marathons we'd cherished since our honeymoon became casualties of her new projects. Sophia is a wildlife photographer, and I always admired her passion for capturing the world's raw beauty. But over the last year, her career seemed to take on a life of its own. "I need to be out there when inspiration strikes," she'd explain when she missed dinner or postponed our plans. I try not to dwell on it too much. Sophia's creativity always operated on a different rhythm from my own. I'm a numbers guy, an accountant, predictable and grounded. Sophia was always a force of nature, chasing the fleeting moments that most people would overlook. I admired that about her. I told myself that her dedication was part of what made her so special. But the cracks in our foundation began to widen. The spontaneous hugs that used to come out of nowhere became rare. Her laughter, once loud and unapologetic, grew subdued. She spent more time away from home, always with the same excuse, work. And while I believed her at first, a nagging doubt began to creep in. It wasn't just her absence that raised red flags. It was the changes in her behavior when she was home. She started carrying her camera bag everywhere, even to places where it didn't make sense, like casual dinners with friends or quick trips to the grocery store. Once, when I jokingly tried to peek inside, she pulled it away with an almost defensive chuckle. "Curiosity killed the cat, Elliot," she said, her tone playful but her grip on the bag tight. Then, there was the notebook. Sophia has always kept detailed notes for her projects, lists of locations, weather conditions, wildlife migration patterns. It was part of her meticulous process, something I respected. But one evening, while tidying up her workspace, I stumbled across something that felt out of place. Amid pages of sketches and journal entries was a cryptic note, Caravan Route 9. It wasn't a location I recognized, and for the life of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that it meant something more. When I asked her about it, she barely looked up from her editing software. "Just a potential photo series," she said, her tone light. But there was a stiffness to her posture, a fleeting tension in her jawline that I couldn't ignore. From that moment on, everything felt different. I noticed the faintest traces of cologne on her clothes, not mine, and the way she avoided making plans with me on weekends, claiming she needed to chase the light. Even her phone habits changed. Sophia used to be terrible at hiding surprises. I always caught on when she was planning a birthday gift or a weekend getaway. But now, her phone was glued to her hand, and the once carefree sharing of photos and texts dwindled to nearly nothing. When I asked about it, she laughed, brushing it off as just work stuff. I tried to push the doubts aside. Every relationship has rough patches, right? Maybe this was just ours. I rationalized her behavior, telling myself that I was overthinking. Sophia loved me. She said it every night before bed, even if her voice sounded distracted. But as the weeks went by, the feeling of unease grew stronger. Caravan Route 9 became an obsession of mine, though I kept it to myself. I Googled it, checked maps, and even asked a coworker if it sounded familiar. Nothing came up. It was as if it existed solely in Sophia's world, a world she no longer wanted me to be a part of. The turning point came one night at dinner. It was a rare occasion. Sophia wasn't rushing out the door, and we were finally having a meal together. We talked about her latest project, or rather, I asked questions while she gave me vague answers. Midway through, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and for a brief moment, I saw her face change. It was subtle, a flicker of tension, quickly masked by her usual smile. "Work stuff," she said, slipping the phone into her pocket. I smiled back, but something inside me broke. For the first time, I felt like I was having dinner with a stranger. My appetite disappeared, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. As we cleaned up after the meal, I caught myself staring at her, searching for signs of the woman I married. She looked the same, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, her eyes sparkling under the kitchen light. But there was a distance in her gaze, as if she was miles away, even when standing right in front of me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to her, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, my mind racing. Was I imagining things? Or was there something she wasn't telling me? The doubts churned in my stomach, relentless and unforgiving. Looking back, I wonder if I could have done something differently. Could I have asked better questions? Paid closer attention? Maybe then, I wouldn't have found myself here, unraveling the threads of our life together, searching for the moment everything changed. But the truth is, even now, I don't know when the cracks first appeared. Maybe they were always there, invisible until the weight of everything made them impossible to ignore. All I know is that the foundation of our marriage, once so strong, was starting to crumble, and I had no idea how to stop it. The day everything changed started like any other. Sophia was bustling around the house, preparing for a regional nature conservancy seminar at Mountain Crest Lodge. She said it was a critical opportunity to showcase her work, one she'd been excited about for weeks. As I watched her pack, there was an energy about her that I hadn't seen in a long time, an eagerness that twisted my stomach into knots. I had planned to go with her. It wasn't that I was particularly interested in seminars or networking events, but part of me hoped that showing up would reconnect us somehow. I even joked about being herb arm candy for the evening, which earned me a distracted laugh. But as the day wore on, I felt more and more drained, the weight of my unease settling over me like a heavy fog. At the last minute, I told Sophia I wasn't feeling well and would stay home instead. She didn't seem disappointed. If anything, she looked relieved. After she left, the house felt eerily quiet. I tried to distract myself, tidying up the clutter that had accumulated during the week. As I moved through the bedroom, something caught my eye: Sophia's black lace underwear lying neatly on the bed. It was part of a matching set she'd prepared to wear under her dress for the seminar. I froze, staring at it, my mind racing. Why would she leave it behind? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she changed her mind, or maybe it didn't go with the dress she chose. But the doubt was like a splinter under my skin, growing more painful the longer I tried to ignore it. Sophia was meticulous about her appearance at events like these. She wouldn't leave something like that behind without a reason. The hours dragged on, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Finally, I gave in to the gnawing suspicion that had been building for weeks. I decided to follow her. Grabbing my keys, I drove to Mountain Crest Lodge, my mind a whirlwind of anxiety and dread. The lodge was bustling when I arrived, filled with attendees milling about and chatting in small groups. I told the security guard at the entrance that I was Sophia's husband, and after a quick verification, he waved me through. Inside, the air buzzed with energy, laughter, clinking glasses, the hum of conversation. But as I scanned the crowd, Sophia was nowhere to be seen. I wandered through the main hall, past display booths and photography exhibits, trying to spot her. It wasn't until I reached the back patio that someone finally recognized her name. A young man, clearly tipsy, mentioned casually that he'd seen Sophia leaving earlier with a man. They looked like they were in a hurry, he said with a lopsided grin. My heart sank. The man didn't have any more details, and I didn't press him further. I returned to my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The drive home was a blur, my thoughts spiraling out of control. Who was this man? Where had they gone? And why hadn't Sophia mentioned any of this to me? When she finally came home, it was well past midnight. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a flush to her cheeks that could have been from the cold night air, or something else. She greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and asked how I was feeling. I couldn't hold back anymore. "What kind of underwear are you wearing right now?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Sophia froze. her expression shifting to something between confusion and alarm. "What?" she asked, her tone defensive. I repeated the question, this time more directly. "You left the black lace set on the bed. What are you wearing right now?" For a moment, she didn't answer. Then, with a shrug that felt too casual, she said, "I'm not wearing any." "But that doesn't mean anything." Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. She walked past me, heading to the bathroom, as if the conversation was over. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my mind racing. The answer wasn't just vague. It was dismissive, as though my concerns didn't matter. It felt like she was daring me to read into it, to draw my own conclusions. That night, I barely slept. Sophia seemed unbothered, falling into a deep slumber as soon as her head hit the pillow. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the evening over and over. The mysterious man, the missing underwear, her evasive answers. They were pieces of a puzzle I couldn't yet solve. By morning, my doubts had transformed into a grim determination. I knew I couldn't live like this, trapped in a chasm between her words and actions. Whatever the truth was, I needed to find it, and I needed to find it soon. The days following Sophia's return from the seminar were an exercise in emotional limbo. On the surface, life carried on as usual. She edited her photos and answered emails while I went to work, each of us moving through our routines as if nothing had changed. But beneath the surface, I was a mess. Every glance, every word, every seemingly innocuous gesture from her felt loaded with hidden meaning. The weight of my suspicions was suffocating. I decided to confide in Jack, my best friend since college. Jack had always been the calm, rational one, a counterbalance to my overthinking nature. Over beers at our favorite pub, I laid it all out. The late nights, the notebook, the seminar, the cryptic response about her underwear. Jack listened quietly, his brow furrowed as he processed everything. "You've got two choices," he said finally, his voice steady. "You either confront her head-on, or you take some time away to clear your head and figure out what you want. But you can't keep torturing yourself like this." Jack's suggestion of taking a break caught me off guard. Where would I even go? I asked, half expecting him to shrug it off. "Blue Water Cove," he said without hesitation. His family owned a summer house there, a cozy place by the water. It's quiet, peaceful. You need some distance to think. At first, I was hesitant. Running away felt like admitting defeat. But the idea of stepping back, even for a few days, started to appeal to me. I told Sophia about Jack's suggestion, framing it as a much-needed getaway to recharge. She seemed surprised but didn't protest. If anything, she looked relieved. Blue Water Cove was everything Jack promised. Serene and picturesque, with its clear blue waters and towering pine trees. Jack's family welcomed me warmly, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a semblance of calm. But the peace of the cove only magnified the turbulence in my mind. Every quiet moment, every breathtaking sunset, reminded me of what was missing in my marriage. One morning, while fishing off the dock with Jack, I finally admitted the depth of my uncertainty. "I don't know what to believe anymore," I said, staring at the water. "She's either hiding something, or I'm going crazy." Jack didn't rush to respond. He reeled in his line, inspecting the bait with practiced ease. "You need to decide," he said eventually, his voice quiet but firm. "Are you going to fight for this marriage, or let it go? But you can't stay in limbo forever." His words stayed with me long after we returned to the house. That night, under the vast starry sky of Blue Water Cove, I made a silent vow to uncover the truth. If Sophia was hiding something, I needed to know. And if I was wrong, if my doubts were nothing more than paranoia, I needed to find a way to fix what was broken between us. When I returned home, I didn't waste any time. "I need to know," I said to Sophia, my voice calm but unyielding. "What's really going on with you?" Her reaction was immediate, a flicker of surprise, quickly replaced by a guarded expression. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. "You've been distant for months," I said. The late nights, the secrecy, the way you brushed off my questions about the seminar. I need the truth, Sophia. I can't keep living like this. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. Elliot, you're imagining things, she said, her voice tinged with exasperation. Work has been intense, and I've been trying to keep up. That's all. But when I pressed her further, her defenses started to crumble. Her eyes darted around the room, as if searching for an escape. Finally, she admitted that Caravan Route 9 was a private project she'd undertaken with Liam, a fellow wildlife photographer. It's not what you think, she said quickly. It was mostly professional. Mostly, I repeated, the word catching in my throat. What does that even mean? Sophia hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. Liam understands parts of me that I feel you stopped noticing, she said finally, her voice trembling. But it's not what you think. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't outright admitting to an affair, but the implication was clear. There was a connection between her and Liam, one that had grown in the space I'd failed to fill. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but all I could do was sit there, stunned into silence. Sophia looked at me with a mixture of guilt and defiance, as if daring me to judge her without knowing the full story. And then she said something that changed everything. There's more, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. That night at the lodge, Liam and I talked about whether we were crossing a line. We didn't. Nothing happened. But it made me realize how far apart we've grown. Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The betrayal wasn't physical, but it was real. She had allowed someone else into a space that was supposed to belong to us. As I stared at her, trying to process everything, I realized I was at a crossroads. Jack was right. I couldn't stay in limbo forever. I had to make a choice, and I had to make it soon. Returning to the house after Sophia's admission felt like walking into a room that was no longer mine. Every piece of furniture, every picture frame, every little knick-knack we collected together over the years suddenly felt like relics of a life I no longer recognized. Sophia's confession lingered in the air, heavy and oppressive, no matter how hard I tried to push it aside. I wanted to hate her. Anger would have been easier to hold on to than the quiet devastation that had settled in my chest. But instead, I found myself overwhelmed with sadness. Sadness for what we'd lost and for the version of us that had once been unshakable. That night, we barely spoke. Sophia tried to act normal, asking if I wanted tea or if I'd seen the email from our insurance company about renewing the policy. Her attempts at small talk felt like needles against my skin, each one reminding me of the gaping chasm between us. I responded in monosyllables, not trusting myself to say anything more. When I finally went to bed, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. The words she'd spoken earlier played on an endless loop in my mind. Liam understands parts of me that I feel you stopped noticing. I wanted to scream at the unfairness of it. I had always tried to be attentive, to support her dreams, to be the steady presence she could rely on. How had I missed the signs that she felt unseen? The days that followed were a blur of quiet tension. Sophia gave me space, retreating in her work while I threw myself into mine. But no matter how many spreadsheets I buried myself in, the questions wouldn't stop. Was it my fault? Had I grown complacent in our marriage? Could I have prevented this if I just tried harder? It wasn't until Jack called to check in that I finally let myself unravel. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice cracking. She says it wasn't physical, but does that even matter? She let someone else take my place. Jack listened patiently, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a quiet seriousness. You're not going to find all the answers at once, he said. But you need to ask yourself one question. Do you want to fix this? Because if you do, it's going to take both of you fighting for it. His words stayed with me long after the call ended. Did I want to fix this? Could I even trust her again? The thought of walking away from 7 years of marriage felt unbearable. But so did the idea of living with this wound, raw and unhealed. That evening, I confronted Sophia again. This time, I was calmer, more measured. "I need to know," I said, my voice steady. "What exactly do you want from me?" "From us?" She looked up from her laptop, her expression a mix of guilt and weariness. "I don't know," she admitted. "I just know I don't want to lose you." Her words were like a double-edged sword. They offered a glimmer of hope, but also deepened my frustration. How could she not know? How could she be so unsure about something that had turned my entire world upside down? As the days turned into weeks, I found myself vacillating between anger and grief. There were moments when I wanted to forgive her, to believe that we could rebuild what we'd lost. And then there were moments when the memory of her words, of her connection with Liam, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I started spending more time alone, taking long walks through the park near our house. It became a form of therapy, a way to sort through the tangled mess of my emotions. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I found myself thinking about the version of myself I'd been before Sophia. The man who played guitar for hours, who dreamed of traveling the world, who didn't measure his worth by someone else's love. That's when it hit me. I had lost myself in this marriage. Somewhere along the way, I had become so focused on being a good husband, on supporting Sophia's dreams, that I'd neglected my own. Her betrayal was a wake-up call, not just about our relationship, but about the parts of me I'd let fade into the background. When I returned home that night, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing. I couldn't keep living in this limbo. I needed to take control of my own happiness, whether or not Sophia and I could find our way back to each other. The night I reached my decision, I wrote Sophia a letter. It felt like the only way to say everything I needed to without being interrupted or sidetracked by emotions. The words came slowly at first, but as I poured my heart onto the page, it was as if a dam had broken. I wrote about the love we once shared, the life we'd built, and the pain her actions had caused. I wrote about my doubts, my fears, and the realization that I'd lost myself in trying to hold us together. Most importantly, I wrote about what I needed moving forward: honesty, effort, and time to heal. When I finished, I folded the letter carefully and left it on the kitchen table, where I knew she'd find it in the morning. Then, with a duffel bag slung over my shoulder, I walked out of the house and checked into a small motel by the waterfront. The first night alone was both liberating and terrifying. The silence was deafening, yet oddly comforting. For the first time in weeks, I didn't have to pretend everything was fine. I allowed myself to feel everything: the anger, the sadness, the confusion, and then I let it wash over me. Over the next few days, I rediscovered parts of myself I hadn't realized were missing. I picked up my guitar for the first time in years, the familiar strum of the strings grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I took long walks along the waterfront, breathing in the salty air and letting the rhythm of the waves soothe my restless mind. And slowly, I began to feel the stirrings of hope. Hope that I could move forward, no matter what the future held. Sophia called me on the third day. Her voice was tentative, laced with a vulnerability I hadn't heard in years. "I read your letter," she said, "and I understand why you needed space. But I want you to know I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this. I love you, Elliot." Her words stirred something in me, but they didn't erase the pain of her betrayal. "I need time," I told her. "This isn't something we can rush." She agreed, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way back to each other. But as the days turned into weeks, I found myself leaning further into my own healing. I started volunteering at a community center, teaching music to kids. It was a simple act, but it gave me a sense of purpose and reminded me of the joy I used to find in sharing my passion. Through this work, I met Jasmine, a chef who ran cooking workshops at the center. Her easy laughter and grounded presence were like a breath of fresh air, a stark contrast to the chaos I'd been living in. At first, I felt guilty for enjoying Jasmine's company. But as our conversations deepened, I realized that she wasn't a replacement for Sophia. She was a reminder of the person I wanted to be. With Jasmine, I felt seen and heard in a way I hadn't in years. It wasn't romantic, at least not yet, but it was a connection I wasn't ready to ignore. Eventually, I made the decision to file for separation. It was one of the hardest choices I've ever had to make, but it felt necessary. Sophia took the news quietly, her guilt and regret palpable. "I'll always love you," she said as we signed the papers. "And I hope you find happiness, Elliot." Her words stayed with me as I moved into a small, airy apartment downtown. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a blank slate where I could rebuild my life on my own terms. I filled it with the things that brought me joy: my guitar, stacks of books, and a kitchen that was always filled with the smell of something baking. As the seasons changed, so did I. The pain of Sophia's betrayal didn't disappear, but it softened, becoming a part of my story rather than the defining chapter. I learned to trust myself again, to prioritize my own happiness, and to embrace the uncertainty of the future. One day, while strumming my guitar on the balcony, I caught myself smiling, a real, unforced smile. I thought about everything I'd been through and realized that, for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Life hadn't turned out the way I'd planned, but it had led me to a place of authenticity and hope. To anyone reading this, my advice is simple. Don't lose yourself trying to hold on to something that's slipping away. Love is a two-way street, and it takes both people fighting for it to make it work. And if you find yourself at a crossroads, remember this. Sometimes letting go is the bravest thing you can do. So now I'm curious. What would you have done in my shoes? Let me know in the comments.